Give her to me, that's my grandchild. My mother said that mid-prayer, marching down the center aisle of a church she was never supposed to find. We had hidden my daughter's baptism for 9 weeks. False dates, wrong venues, because my mother turns every sacred moment into a scene about herself. A cousin handed her the address anyway. She didn't wait. She walked straight to the front and reached for my baby with both hands. I didn't flinch. I held my daughter tighter and looked at the priest. He set his scripture down. He leaned toward my mother and said 4 words, quiet enough that only she and I heard them, and she walked out the back doors. 61 people watched her leave. Not one followed. What happened in the parking lot in the next 12 minutes cost her the one person still willing to take her calls. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to the night my cousin told me exactly what my mother promised her in exchange for that address. In my family, there was a specific way of breathing. You didn't take deep breaths. You took shallow ones, keeping your eyes on my mother's hands. If her rings started clicking against the table, a storm was coming. If she sighed and touched her temple, the storm was already here. My job was to be the lightning rod. For 28 years, I was the one who moved the glass of wine before she knocked it over. I was the one who pulled her aside at my cousin's graduation when she started sobbing because the valedictorian's speech was too loud for her nerves. I did it so my father didn't have to. My father is a man who loves silence more than he loves the truth. He would sit in his recliner, staring at the television, while my mother screamed at the walls in the kitchen. When I would look at him for help, he'd just shake his head and mouth the family law. Just keep the peace, Maya, don't trigger her, you know how she gets. I knew, we all knew. It meant my needs, my milestones, and my sanity were secondary to her moods. I was the meat shield between her ego and the rest of the world. Then I had Lily. When they placed my daughter in my arms, something in my chest physically shifted. It felt like a door locking. I looked at her tiny, perfect face and realized I was done. I wasn't going to raise her in a house where we all whispered because Grandma was having a moment. I wasn't going to let Lily become the next generation's lightning rod. The first time my mother came to the house after we brought Lily home, she didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask if I needed help with the laundry or a hot meal. She walked through the front door, ignored my husband, and marched straight to the bassinet. "She looks just like me," my mother said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a claim. She picked Lily up without asking. Lily was sleeping, and the sudden movement startled her. She started to cry. Instead of soothing her, my mother started swaying aggressively, her voice rising. "Oh, stop that, you're fine, don't be difficult like your mother." I reached out and took my daughter back. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "She needs to eat, Mom, and she needs it to be quiet." My mother froze. She looked at her empty hands, then at me. Her eyes narrowed. This was the moment where I was supposed to apologize. I was supposed to say I was tired, that I didn't mean it, and offer her a cup of tea to smooth things over. I didn't. I walked into the nursery and closed the door. That was the start of the hiding. I knew then that the baptism couldn't be a family event. It couldn't be a stage for her to perform her role as the long-suffering grandmother. I wanted one day that was just about Lily, one day that felt holy instead of heavy. I started planning in secret. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't mention it in the family group chat. I hand-selected 61 people, friends, my husband's family, and a few cousins who had managed to stay out of my mother's orbit. It was a small, safe village. I went to see Father Thomas at St. Jude's 3 weeks later. I was a mess. Every time the heavy oak doors of the rectory opened, I jumped. I felt like a fugitive. I was sure my mother was lurking in the bushes, waiting to catch me betraying her. Father Thomas is an older man with white hair and eyes that look like they've seen everything twice. He poured 2 mugs of coffee in his small office. He didn't rush me. He just watched me check the window for the 3rd time. "You're very focused on the entrance, Maya," he said softly. I don't want any trouble," I whispered. "My mother doesn't know about the date. If she finds out, she'll turn the service into a spectacle. She'll make it about her." He set his mug down. He didn't tell me I was being dramatic. He didn't tell me to honor my mother. He leaned forward and pushed the cream toward me. "A sanctuary is a place of peace," he said. "It is not a theater. You hold the keys to who enters your life and who enters this room. We will keep the doors watched." For the first time in weeks, I took a full breath. I felt like I had an ally who didn't care about keeping the peace at the expense of my soul, but the peace didn't last. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my cousin Sarah. "Hey, I heard you bought the most beautiful christening gown. Silk with the lace trim. Where are you keeping it? I'd love to see it." I stopped in my tracks. I had only mentioned the gown to my mother and my husband. I hadn't told Sarah anything. The shallow breathing came back. I realized then that my secret wasn't a secret anymore. The walls were starting to talk, and they were speaking my mother's language. The strategy of silence only works if everyone agrees to be quiet. For 9 weeks, I was the only one holding up my end of the bargain. My mother didn't take being ignored well. To her, a lack of information wasn't just a boundary, it was a personal insult. She began a campaign of concerned check-ins that were really just reconnaissance missions. She would call my husband, Mark, while he was at work, crying about how I wasn't answering her texts. She would call my father, who would then call me, begging me to just give her a bone so he could have a peaceful evening. The cost of my boundary started to pile up in small, jagged ways. I couldn't go to the local grocery store without a neighbor stopping me to ask if I was feeling better, their eyes scanning my face for signs of the instability my mother had been hinting at. The real damage happened on a Tuesday morning. I was 6 weeks postpartum, headed to my follow-up appointment. I hadn't told my mother the time or the location, but in a town this small, you don't have to. She knew my OBGYN. She knew I always took the 10:00 a.m. slots. I was sitting in the waiting room, Lily asleep in her car seat at my feet when the glass front doors hissed open. I didn't even have to look up. I knew the clip of those heels. My mother didn't sit down. She didn't come over to me. She stood in the center of the lobby under the fluorescent lights and began to wail. Not a quiet cry, but a performative, chest-beating lament. "I just want to see my grandchild," she shouted. The receptionist looked up, startled. 2 other pregnant women in the corner shifted uncomfortably. "My daughter has erased me. She's keeping that baby in a cage of silence." I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood up, grabbing the car seat handle. "Mom, stop." "Not here." "Then where, Maya? You won't answer the door. You won't tell us about the baptism. You're sick. Everyone sees it. You've lost your mind since the birth." She was making a scene in a medical clinic, weaponizing my own health against me. I saw the nurse peek her head out from the back hallway, her expression a mix of pity and professional concern. My mother saw it too. She leaned into it, clutching her chest. "She needs help," my mother told the lobby at large. "She's had a total break." "I'm just trying to save my granddaughter from a mother who has turned into a stranger." I didn't argue. I didn't stay for my appointment. I pushed past her, the car seat bumping against her hip, and walked out to my car. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could barely breathe. That afternoon, my father called. I expected him to be angry at her. I expected him to ask if I was okay. "Maya," he sighed, his voice sounding thin and exhausted. "You really shouldn't have walked away from her like that. She came home in a state. She's talking about how you're clearly suffering from some kind of psychosis. Just apologize. Give her a date for the baptism. Let her be involved and this all goes away. I can't keep living in a house where she's crying 18 hours a day." "She lied about me in a public lobby, Dad," I said. My voice was flat. "She told strangers I was mentally unfit." "She's just hurt," he replied. "People say things when they're hurt. Just fix it." That was the first real crack. I realized my father wouldn't just stay neutral, he would actively participate in my destruction if it meant he could watch his golf tournaments in peace. The final blow of the week came an hour later. Mark sent me a link. "Don't look at the comments," was all he wrote. It was a video my mother had posted on Facebook. She was sitting in her sunroom, lighting dim, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The caption read, "Pray for my daughter." Postpartum psychosis is a silent thief. It has stolen my Maya and replaced her with someone who hides her child in the dark. We are doing everything we can to get her the help she needs. The comments were a bloodbath. Third cousins I hadn't seen in years were offering support. People from my high school were suggesting inpatient facilities. She had taken my privacy and turned it into a public tragedy where she was the hero and I was the villain. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at Lily. She was staring up at the ceiling fan, blissfully unaware that her grandmother was currently convincing the world I was a danger to her. I took a screenshot of the video. I saved the link. Then I went to my desk and pulled out a folder I had started 3 years ago, the one filled with every erratic text and every recorded outburst. That was the first lie she told the world. It was also the last one I would let her tell without a fight. The retaliation wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. Once my mother realized her Facebook video hadn't forced me into a tearful apology, she moved from social warfare to physical presence. Mark was at work on Thursday when I heard the first thump. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, rhythmic striking against the glass of the patio doors at the back of the house. I was in the nursery, just finishing a feeding. I froze. Lily's eyes went wide, reflecting my own fear. I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway. From there, I could see into the kitchen and out to the deck. My mother was standing there, her face pressed against the double-pane glass. She looked frantic. Her hair, usually sprayed into a perfect helmet, was wispy and wild. She wasn't using her hand to knock, she was using a heavy stone coaster she must have picked up from our outdoor table. "Thump, thump, thump. I know you're in there, Maya," she screamed. The glass muffled her voice, making it sound like she was underwater, but the rage was clear. "Open this door right now. I have a right to see that baby." I didn't move. I didn't turn on a light. I retreated back into the nursery, sat on the floor in the corner furthest from the window, and pulled Lily tight against my chest. I felt like I was back in high school, hiding in the bathroom while she threw plates in the kitchen. The pounding went on for 40 minutes. Then it changed. "If you don't open this door, I'm calling the police," she yelled. "I have the video, Maya. Everyone knows you're having a breakdown. I'll tell them you're a danger to yourself. I'll have them take her away for her own safety." My heart stopped. It wasn't just a tantrum anymore. She was threatening to use the legal system and the lie she had spent a week cultivating to take my child. She was trying to prove her postpartum psychosis narrative in real time by provoking me into a reaction. If I opened the door and screamed back, I was unstable. If I stayed quiet, I was catatonic. I stayed on the floor. I watched the shadows of the trees move across the nursery wall. I realized then that my mother didn't want a relationship with Lily. She wanted ownership. Lily was the ultimate leverage, a way to force me back into my role as the family regulator. She finally stopped pounding. I heard her heels click across the wooden deck, down the stairs, and then the roar of her car engine as she peeled out of the driveway. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. 10 minutes later, my phone hissed on the changing table, a text from her. "Sarah told me you bought a christening gown, Maya. I know it's happening soon. You can't hide a sacrament. See you at the altar." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Sarah, my cousin Sarah, who I had grown up with like a sister. I had only mentioned the lace on that gown to her 2 days ago during a supportive phone call. Sarah had been my one link to the extended family, the one person I thought was on my side. I looked at the phone, then at my daughter. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in the room. Sarah hadn't just gossiped, she had handed my mother a map to the one thing I was trying to keep sacred. My mother didn't just have a motive now. She had a target. She knew there was a dress, which meant she knew there was a date, and she knew there was a church. I had tried to build a wall around my new life, but I had left the gate unlocked for a cousin who was still playing by the old family rules. I wasn't just fighting my mother anymore. I was fighting an entire system designed to feed her. I stayed on the nursery floor long after the sun went down. That was the night I realized I had no one left to trust. I felt like I was drowning in a room full of air. For days after the patio glass incident, I lived in a state of constant, low-grade vibration. Every car that slowed down on our street made me grip the edges of the kitchen counter until my knuckles went white. I had stopped answering the door. I had stopped checking Facebook. I had even stopped going for walks with the stroller because the neighborhood felt like a gallery of people who believed I was losing my mind. The isolation was a physical weight. I had lost my mother to her own ego, my father to his cowardice, and my cousin to a betrayal I still couldn't fully wrap my head around. Sarah and I had shared a bunk bed at our grandmother's house every summer for 10 years. Now she was just another set of eyes watching me for a slip-up. On Sunday night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The screen was glowing, reflecting off the polished wood. I was staring at a draft of an email to Father Thomas. "Dear Father Thomas," the draft read, "I think it's best if we cancel the baptism for this coming Saturday. The situation with my family has escalated, and I can't risk a scene in the church. I don't want my daughter's first milestone to be a memory of police and shouting. Thank you for your help, but I need to protect her." I couldn't stop crying. The tears were landing on the trackpad, making the cursor jump. I felt like a failure. I was supposed to be the one who broke the cycle, but instead, I was letting my mother's chaos win. I was letting her turn my joy into a secret that had to be buried to be safe. I was about to hit send when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Mark was standing there, still in his work scrubs. He didn't say anything at first. He just leaned over and read the screen. He pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. "You're giving up," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plain, quiet observation. "I'm protecting her, Mark," I whispered. "You heard her through the glass. You saw what she posted. If she comes to that church, she'll make it a nightmare. I can't let that happen to Lily." Mark reached over, took the mouse, and hit the trash can icon. He didn't just close the draft, he deleted it. "We don't hide our daughter's light just because your mother prefers the dark," he said. His voice was the steadiest thing I had ever heard. "If we cancel this, she wins. She learns that if she yells loud enough, she gets to decide what we do. That's not the world I want Lily to grow up in." He stood up, walked into the nursery, and came back a minute later holding Lily. She was wrapped in a yellow blanket, her eyes dark and curious in the dim light of the kitchen. He handed her to me, and as her weight settled into my lap, the vibration in my chest finally slowed down. "We're going to that church," Mark said, "and we're going to celebrate our daughter. Your mother doesn't own the air in that building." That was the floor. I had hit the bottom, and instead of staying there, Mark had reached down and pulled me up. The next morning, I called Father Thomas. I didn't ask to cancel. I told him everything: the Facebook video, the threats of calling CPS, the glass door, and the betrayal by my cousin. I waited for him to tell me it was too much drama for his parish. Instead, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Maya," Father Thomas said, his voice dropping into a register I hadn't heard before, "I need you to send me your mother's full name, and if you have a recent photograph of her, please email that as well." "Why?" I asked. "Because I spent 20 years in a parish where the loudest voices tried to drown out the quietest prayers," he said. I know how to handle a bully. You bring the gown. I'll handle the doors. That was the first time I felt a spark of something other than fear. It was a small light, but it was enough to see the path ahead. The lie didn't stay within the walls of the clinic or the confines of a Facebook post. It traveled through our small town like a sickness. My mother had spent 30 years cultivating the image of the selfless, long-suffering matriarch, and the community was more than happy to play their part in her drama. By the time the weekend arrived, the damage had gone fully public. I couldn't go to the mailbox without feeling the eyes of the neighbors from behind their curtains. I knew what they saw: the unstable daughter who was shunning her saint of a mother. I tried to stay home, but there was an anniversary dinner for my Aunt Linda on Wednesday night. It was neutral ground, or it was supposed to be. Mark was working late, so I had to go alone with Lily. I almost canceled, but I knew if I didn't show up, it would only confirm my mother's narrative that I was withdrawn and incapable of basic social function. I walked into the private room of the Italian restaurant 10 minutes late, carrying Lily in her car seat. The room was loud with the clinking of silverware and the hum of 20 relatives talking at once. The moment I crossed the threshold, the volume dropped. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a slow, awkward tapering off of conversation. My Aunt Linda, who usually smothers me in perfume and hugs, just gave me a tight, nervous smile from the head of the table. "Oh, Maya, you made it. We weren't sure." She trailed off, looking over my shoulder as if expecting a doctor to be following me with a clipboard. I looked for a place to sit. Usually, there's a scramble to hold the baby. Usually, my cousins are fighting over who gets to see her toes. But as I moved toward the table, people physically shifted. My Uncle Jim suddenly became very interested in his breadstick. My younger cousins looked at their phones. No one asked to hold her. No one asked how she was sleeping. I found a chair at the far end, near the kitchen door. I sat down and tucked the car seat under the table. The person next to me was Uncle Robert, my father's older brother. He leaned in, smelling of red wine and pity. "You know, Maya," he whispered, his voice heavy with unearned wisdom. "Postpartum stuff. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but you shouldn't let it tear the family apart. Your mother is worried sick. Hormones are a powerful thing, honey. You need to listen to the people who love you and get some professional help before you do something you can't take back." I looked at him. I looked at his kind, misguided eyes. He truly believed he was helping. He truly believed I was the problem because my mother had told him so with tears in her eyes. "I'm fine, Uncle Robert," I said. My voice sounded loud in the hushed room. "I'm just protecting my daughter." He shook his head and looked away. To him, my denial was just further proof of my condition. Then I saw her. Cousin Sarah was sitting directly across from me. She hadn't looked up once since I arrived. She was picking at a piece of lasagna, her head down. She reached across the table for a bread roll, and the overhead chandelier light caught something on her right hand. It was a flash of fire, a heavy, old-fashioned diamond set in a distinctive platinum filigree. I froze. I knew that ring. It was our grandmother's vintage wedding ring. My mother had kept it locked in a floor safe for 20 years, telling me and every other female relative that it would only be given away on a very special occasion to someone who truly valued family. I looked at the ring, then at Sarah's guilty face, then at my mother, who was sitting at the other end of the table, watching me with a look of calm, terrifying triumph. The price of the church address wasn't just loyalty. It was an inheritance. My mother had bought my cousin's betrayal with a piece of jewelry that was supposed to be a family legacy. I realized then that this wasn't just a family disagreement. It was an auction, and my mother had more currency than I did. I didn't finish my dinner. I didn't wait for the cake. I picked up Lily's car seat and walked out. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me to stay. As I walked through the parking lot, I realized the lie hadn't just spread. It had been bought and paid for. I was standing in the dark, alone, with a baby and a secret baptism that felt more like a target every hour. The realization about the ring changed the temperature of my blood. It wasn't just that Sarah had sold me out. It was that my mother had been waiting for a moment significant enough to use the grandmother's ring as a bribe. She had been hoarding that diamond like a weapon, and she'd finally found the right target. I didn't go home and cry. I didn't call Sarah to scream at her. I went straight back to St. Jude's the next morning. Father Thomas was in the sanctuary, adjusting the altar cloths. The church was empty, the air smelling of old wood and beeswax. I walked up the center aisle, my footsteps echoing against the stone. When he saw my face, he stopped what he was doing and stepped down from the dais. "She bought my cousin," I said. No greeting, no preamble. "She gave Sarah my grandmother's wedding ring in exchange for the address of this church." Father Thomas didn't look surprised. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Inheritance is often the final leash," he said. "People will trade a lot of peace for a bit of gold." "She's coming," I said. "She knows it's Saturday. She knows the gown is here. She's going to try to take Lily, or at least take the moment. She's told half the town I'm having a psychotic break. If she makes a scene here, people will just think she's a hero trying to save a baby from an unstable mother." Father Thomas took a deep breath and gestured for me to sit in the front pew. He sat next to me, not as a priest, but as a man who had clearly spent decades watching families tear themselves apart in the name of God. "Maya, I spent 20 years in a parish in a city where the wealthy families treated the church like their personal theater," he began. "I have seen mothers try to stop weddings and fathers try to claim children that weren't theirs. You are worried about her performance. But a performance requires a stage and an audience." He reached into the pocket of his cassock and pulled out a small, laminated card. It was a list of names and phone numbers. "I spoke with the local precinct this morning," he said. "The chief is a friend. I told him we were expecting a trespasser who has been harassing a parishioner. There will be a squad car parked silently behind the rectory on Saturday morning. They won't be in the pews, but they will be on the grounds." I felt a surge of relief, but it was followed quickly by a new fear. If my mother sees a police car, she'll scream that I'm the one who called them because I'm paranoid. She'll use it as proof. "Then we don't let her see them," Father Thomas said. "And we don't let her dictate the terms of the sanctuary. I have already instructed the ushers. If anyone not on your list of 61 attempts to enter, they will be directed to the side chapel where I will speak with them privately. But if she breaches those doors, Maya, you must do one thing." "What?" "You must hold your daughter and you must trust me. I have something she doesn't expect. I have the truth and I have the authority of this house." He stood up and placed a hand on my head. It was a warmth beat I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't the heavy, manipulative love of my family. It was just a blessing. It was the feeling of someone standing in front of me so I didn't have to be the shield for once. "Go home," he said. "Wash the gown. Prepare the celebration. Let her plan her scene. She is building a house on sand." I left the church feeling like I finally had backup. I wasn't a lone woman hiding on a nursery floor anymore. I had a plan and I had a witness. The final confirmation of the war came that evening. I received a text from my father. It was the first time he had messaged me without mentioning my mother's feelings first. "Maya, I've tried to talk her out of it. I told her it's too much, but she's adamant. She says if you won't give her the grandchild, she'll take the grandchild's soul back for the family. She's made me promise to drive her on Saturday. I can't stop her, honey. I'm sorry. I just can't handle the screaming if I say no." He wasn't sorry for me. He was sorry for himself. He was warning me, but he was also admitting he would be the getaway driver for my own mother's assault on my peace. I looked at the text and I didn't feel the usual spike of guilt. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. Drive her right into the middle of it." I went to the closet and pulled out the christening gown. I spent 2 hours ironing the lace, moving the steam iron carefully over every tiny loop and thread. I wasn't just preparing a dress. I was preparing a line in the sand. Saturday was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one who apologized for the noise. The leverage wasn't a document or a bank statement. It was a person. Specifically, it was my father. My mother had spent her entire life using him as her primary support system, her driver, her witness, and her enabler. She assumed that because he had folded for 30 years, he would fold for 31. But my father had a secret weakness that was even greater than his fear of my mother, his fear of being looked at. He was a man of the shadows. He wanted to be the background character in his own life. He could handle my mother's screaming in the kitchen because the neighbors couldn't hear it through the brick walls. He couldn't handle the idea of a public failure. On Friday night, 12 hours before the baptism, I sent him a text. It was the only time I didn't frame it as a plea. I didn't ask him to stay home. I didn't tell him I missed him. I spoke the only language he truly understood, the language of social survival. "Dad," I wrote, "I know you're driving her tomorrow. I know she thinks she's going to walk in and take charge, but you need to know who else is going to be there. I've invited 61 people. That includes the head of the school board, your old boss from the plant, and the pastor from your Saturday morning breakfast group. If you walk through those doors and participate in her scene, 61 people are going to watch you make a fool of yourself. They are going to see you help a woman harass her own daughter in a house of God. And then, Dad, you will never see us again. Not for Christmas. Not for Lily's birthdays, not ever. Is her tantrum worth that audience?" I didn't wait for a reply. I turned my phone off and put it in the kitchen drawer. Mark came in and saw the drawer close. "Did you send it?" "Yes," I said. Now we see what he fears more, her voice or the neighborhood's eyes. I spent the rest of the night in a state of strange, cold calm. I wasn't reactive anymore. I wasn't checking the windows. I felt like a general who had already placed the charges and was just waiting for the clock to run out. The strategy was set. The leverage was confirmed. My mother's power relied entirely on her ability to make the rest of us move to her rhythm. She thought she was the director of the play, but she didn't realize I had changed the script and Father Thomas had changed the theater. I went into the nursery one last time before bed. The christening gown was hanging on the door, the white silk glowing in the moonlight. I reached out and touched the lace that my cousin Sarah had sold for a ring. I didn't feel angry at Sarah anymore. I felt pity. She had a diamond, but she was still trapped in my mother's orbit, orbiting a dying star. I was out. I was standing on my own ground. I realized that my mother had exhausted every resource she had. She had used the money, she had used the inheritance, and she had used the lies. She was walking into that church with nothing but a loud voice and a man who was currently staring at a text message that told him his reputation was on the line. The confirmation didn't come in a text back from my father. It came in the silence. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He didn't try to keep the peace. He was quiet. I slept for 6 hours, the first real sleep I'd had since Lily was born. I didn't dream of my mother's screaming. I didn't dream of the glass patio doors. I just slept. Saturday morning arrived with a sharp, clear sunlight. It was the kind of morning where everything looks high definition. Mark made coffee, and we moved through the house with a quiet efficiency. We dressed Lily in the gown. She didn't cry. She just looked at us with those wide, dark eyes as if she knew today was the day we drew the line. As we strapped her into her car seat, Mark looked at me over the roof of the car. "You ready?" "I've been ready for 28 years, I said. We drove to the church in silence. As we pulled into the parking lot of St. Jude's, I didn't look for my mother's car. I looked at the heavy oak doors. I looked at the 61 people walking inside, our friends, our chosen family, the witnesses to our daughter's life. The countdown had reached 0. The leverage was in place. All that was left was the collision. The morning of the baptism was too quiet. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized stillness that comes right before the sky turns green. I dressed Lily in the nursery, my fingers steady as I buttoned the tiny silk loops of the gown. Mark was downstairs packing the diaper bag, his movements purposeful and loud. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. When we arrived at St. Jude's, the parking lot was already half full. I saw the cars of my college friends, Mark's parents, and the few cousins who hadn't taken my mother's side. I looked for my father's silver sedan. It wasn't there. I walked into the church and the cool air of the narthex hit me like a physical relief. Father Thomas was there, looking regal in his white vestments. He gave me a sharp, knowing nod. "The ushers know the list," he whispered. "Go inside, focus on your daughter." I took my seat in the front pew. To my left and right, the 61 people I had chosen sat in a protective semicircle. These were the people who had seen through the Facebook videos and the psychosis narrative. They were the ones who had checked on me with groceries and quiet texts instead of pitying looks. The service began. The organ music swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling. Father Thomas stood at the altar, his voice echoing with a calm authority as he began the scripture reading. For 5 minutes, I actually forgot about the doors. I looked at Lily, who was batting at the light filtering through the stained glass. It was perfect. It was exactly the piece I had spent 9 weeks fighting for. But my mother has always had a sense of timing. She doesn't just want to be present, she wants to be the climax. I heard it first, the heavy groan of the oak doors at the back of the church. They didn't open softly, they were shoved. The sound of heels against the stone floor was like a series of small, sharp gunshots. Click, click, click. The 61 guests didn't turn as one, but I felt the ripple of tension move through the pews. I didn't look back, I kept my eyes on Father Thomas. I saw his gaze shift from his book to the center aisle. His expression didn't change, but he stood a little taller. In my periphery, I saw her. My mother was marching down the aisle, her chin tilted up, her coat swinging. She looked like she was heading into battle. Behind her, trailing several paces back, was my father. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. He was staring at the floor, his face a deep, mottled red. My mother didn't stop at the back. She didn't slip into an empty pew. She walked straight toward the front, her eyes locked on Lily. She looked confident. She looked like she had already won, like she expected the room to part for her and for me to crumble into the apology she'd been demanding for 2 months. She reached the front row and stopped. She didn't look at me. She looked at the priest. "This has gone far enough," she said. Her voice wasn't a scream, but it had that vibrating edge that usually preceded one. "My daughter is not well. This service is a sham. I am here to take my grandchild home where she is safe." She reached out both hands toward Lily. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I didn't even stand up. I just sat there, holding my daughter tighter, and watched as the trap she didn't know I'd set began to close. The room went deathly silent. My mother's hands were still out, hovering in the air between us. She was waiting for the audience to gasp. She was waiting for the 61 witnesses to agree with her. Instead, she got Father Thomas. He set his scripture down on the pulpit. The sound of the heavy book hitting the wood was like a gavel. He didn't look at me, and he didn't look at the baby. He looked directly at my mother, leaned over the rail, and prepared to end it. The silence in the church was absolute. It was the kind of silence that has a physical weight to it, the kind that makes your ears ring. My mother stood there with her hands outstretched, a statue of entitled demand. She was so certain that her presence alone would break the room. She was waiting for me to be the daughter she'd spent 28 years training, the one who would hand over the baby just to stop the noise. I didn't move. I looked at her hands, then up at her face. Her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the pews, looking for the audience. She wanted to see the pity. She wanted to see the people nodding along to her unstable daughter story. But she didn't see pity. She saw 61 people sitting perfectly still. She saw my college roommate with her jaw set. She saw Mark's parents looking at her with cold, clinical observation. She saw her own neighbors from 3 doors down, people she'd told the psychosis, lied to, watching her barge into a baptism with a snarl on her face. The audience she had cultivated had turned into a jury. Father Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood behind the baptismal font, his hands resting on the stone. He looked at my mother, then at my father, who was standing 3 steps behind her, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "Ma'am," Father Thomas said, the word was a barrier. "This is a house of prayer. You are not a participant in the sacrament. You are a guest, and guests do not dictate the liturgy." "She's my grandchild," my mother hissed. She took a step closer to me. "And my daughter is having a medical crisis. Everyone knows it. I am here to protect that child." She reached again, her fingers brushing the silk of Lily's gown. That's when Father Thomas set his scripture down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He leaned over the rail, his face inches from hers. He didn't whisper because he was afraid. He whispered because he wanted the impact to be surgical. "Your husband is waiting," he said. He didn't look at my mother as he said it. He looked directly at my father. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the arched window on the side of the sanctuary that looked out onto the street. My mother froze. She frowned, confused by the shift in the script. She turned her head, following the line of the priest's finger. Outside, parked right against the curb under the shade of an oak tree, was a local police cruiser. The sun glinted off the black and white paint. Next to it, standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, was the chief of police, a man my father had known for 30 years. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there looking at the church doors. But that wasn't what broke her. Standing 5 feet away from the police cruiser, near the idling engine of his own car, was my father. He hadn't stayed behind her. He hadn't walked up to the front to support her rescue mission. At some point between the door and the altar, he had seen the faces in the pews. He had seen the police car. He had realized that the audience was not on her side, and for the first time in his life, his fear of public shame had outweighed his fear of his wife. He had defected. My father was standing on the curb, looking down at his shoes, refusing to even look toward the church windows. He looked small. He looked defeated. But he was outside. He had left her alone at the front of the room. My mother looked back at me, then at the 61 people watching her, then back at the window. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The enabler was gone. The getaway driver had quit. She was standing in the center of a room full of people who saw exactly who she was, and she had no one left to hide behind. "Edward," she called out. Her voice was thin now. It wasn't the voice of a matriarch. It was the voice of a bully who had just realized the playground was empty. There was no answer. The power evaporated from her posture. Her shoulders slumped. Her face, which had been tight with righteous fury, suddenly looked old and tired. She looked down at my hands, still gripped firmly around my daughter, and she realized there was no psychosis to be found here. There was only a mother protecting her child. Then the final defection happened. In the 3rd row, cousin Sarah stood up. She was wearing a navy dress, and the grandmother's ring was still on her finger. I saw her look at my mother, then at the door, then at me. She didn't follow my mother out. Instead, she took a step toward the center of the pew, sat back down, and turned her back toward the aisle. She was staying. She was choosing the side that didn't involve a bribe. My mother didn't say another word. She didn't scream. She didn't wail. She turned around and walked. She didn't walk. She speed walked. The click, click, click of her heels was faster now, desperate as she headed for the oak doors. She pushed them open and vanished into the sunlight. The doors groaned shut. The heavy thump of the wood meeting the frame felt like a seal. I looked at the window. Through the glass, I saw her reach the sidewalk. I saw her start to scream at my father. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the frantic gestures, the way she was pointing back at the church, demanding he go back in. My father didn't move. He didn't even look at her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and dropped them onto the pavement at her feet. Then he turned around and started walking down the street, away from the car, away from her, and away from the life he had spent 30 years letting her ruin. The parking lot confrontation lasted 12 minutes. We stayed inside. We watched through the glass as my mother stood by the car, screaming at the air, eventually picking up the keys and getting into the driver's seat herself. She peeled out of the lot, the screech of tires the only sound left of her. Inside the church, it was quiet. Father Thomas picked up his scripture. He didn't mention the woman who had just left. He didn't offer a sermon on forgiveness. He just looked at me and smiled. "Shall we continue?" he asked. I looked down at Lily. She was asleep. The weight of her was light, but the world felt solid again. The lie was broken. The village was watching. "Yes," I said. "Please." The fallout was quiet, which was the only thing my mother never knew how to handle. When she peeled out of that parking lot, she didn't just lose a grandchild, she lost her audience. The 61 people inside that church didn't go home and gossip about my breakdown. They went to the reception at our house and ate pulled pork and cupcakes. They toasted to Lily. They treated the scene at the church like a bad weather event that had passed, something you shake your umbrella at and then forget. My father didn't come to the reception. He didn't come home either. Mark heard from a friend that my father had checked into the local Holiday Inn for the night. For a man who would rather walk into traffic than make a scene, checking into a motel in his own town was the equivalent of a revolution. He wasn't ready to talk to me yet, and I wasn't ready to hear from him, but the silence from their house was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. It was the first time in 30 years he hadn't been there to absorb her impact. The isolation was immediate for her, without my father to drive her, without me to manage her, and with a town that had seen her perform a rescue that looked a lot like a harassment. She withdrew. She posted one more video about parental alienation, but the comments remained empty. No one was buying the ticket anymore. Cousin Sarah stayed at the reception until the very end. She helped me pack up the leftovers and wash the punch bowl. She didn't mention the ring, and neither did I. We weren't fixed, and the trust wasn't restored, but she worked. She stayed late. She carried the heavy boxes to the car. She was starting the long, slow process of earning her way back into a life that no longer had room for spies. She still wears the ring, but I notice she turns the stone toward her palm now, hiding the diamond that cost her my confidence. Life is smaller now. It's quieter. I don't check the family group chat because I left it. I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. My world has shrunk down to Mark, Lily, and the 61 people who sat in those pews. It's a smaller village, but the ground is solid. On Sunday morning, a week after the baptism, I woke up to a house that didn't feel like a fortress. I walked into the nursery and saw Lily staring at her mobile. I picked her up and sat in the rocking chair, the one my mother had tried to claim ownership of. I looked at the memory box on the shelf. Inside, the christening gown is folded neatly. It isn't stained. It isn't torn. It's just a piece of white silk that went through a storm and came out clean. I realized then that my mother didn't take anything from us. She tried to take the light, but all she did was show us exactly where the shadows were. I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires an investment of energy I'd rather give to my daughter. I'm just finished. I have one question for you. If you were sitting in that front pew and your mother reached for your child after months of lies, would you have let her hold the baby one last time just to keep the peace, or would you have kept your grip tight? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If this story spoke to you, check out the link in the description about a bride whose mother secretly canceled her caterer 3 days before the wedding. You won't believe how the groom handled it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about finding peace in the middle of the noise.